examining your novel up close and far away by using a telescope and a microscope in order to become a better writer. What on earth does that mean? How does using a telescope and a microscope make you a better writer? We're going to be answering those questions and more, and we're starting right now. If someone were to ask you, what do you need to become a better writer? And if you said a microscope and a telescope, what on earth does that mean? How can you use those two awkward things to become a better writer? Well, look at it this way. We have to ask ourselves, what does a telescope and a microscope do? They allow you to zoom in and to see things either far away or extremely up close. You can use a telescope to see the stars, to see things from a tremendous distance. But a microscope allows you to zoom in and to see things extremely up close. As a writer, you have to be able to do the same thing with your novel. You have to be able to zoom in, just like a microscope, and examine each individual sentence and to see if you're using the proper grammar. But at the same time, you have to be able to zoom out like you would a telescope in order to see the flow of your novel from start to finish and to see if how is it working? How is the flow in the three-act structure flowing in your novel? And as a writer, you want to be able to have this ability to examine your own novel up close and far away. Because whenever novels are submitted to literary agents, they tend to have one of two problems. Either the writer is really good at using the five senses, at writing a sentence really well, and painting a beautiful picture. But the problem is that they may not be able to tell a story that flows properly through the three-act structure. Their novel might tend to wander. The pacing might be off. Or there might be some writers out there who do an amazing job at they can tell the three-act structure. They know what they're doing. They know the flow of the story. The problem is that they can't use their five senses when just writing a simple sentence. Being able to describe what a room looks like, or the setting, or a location, or what somebody looks like. They might know what they want to say. They might know the story overall. But just in terms of writing a paragraph, that is where they have difficulties. But as a writer, you want to be able to use the microscope to zoom in to your own paragraphs, your own sentences, and to have that ability to know whether or not you're describing the location, the setting, the characters properly, to a point where when someone reads your novel, they can see it happening in their mind. They know what's happening. But at the same time, you want to develop the ability to step back from your novel and to see it like you would looking through a telescope at the stars above. And you want to be able to know whether or not the novel is flowing properly from start to finish with the three-act structure. By having these two abilities at the same time dramatically increases your ability to write an amazing novel right away. Instead of having to write 6 or 7 or 8 drafts, you can write maybe 1 or 2 drafts. Now, Stephen King says that he writes about 6 pages a day, and he does a really good job at writing those 6 pages. And then after a few weeks, he has a novel finished, and then he goes back and he rereads it. And he might make a few changes here and there. But overall, Stephen King's novel is pretty much finished right away. He might have a second or a third draft, but for the most part, his novel is pretty much ready to go after the first draft. Of course, he's had many decades of practice. But Stephen King has the ability to zoom in like a microscope and examine each sentence as he is writing, to know if he is using the 5 senses properly, to making and describing a scene to a point where when you read it, you can see and feel what is happening. But he also has the ability to zoom out from his novel, even if it's 1,000 pages. And he knows when he is on the right track, and he is creating a 3-act structure in which the story is flowing properly forward like an arrow. Because as a writer, you want to write your novels like an arrow going forward from start to finish. The reader has to sense movement. The reader has to know that the story is going somewhere. You don't want the reader feeling like the story is wandering all over the place. You want the reader to know that this is going somewhere, even if it's 1,000 pages. And Stephen King does this very well. He knows when his story is wandering. He knows when to stop and to be able to pull back and to fix it. And if he isn't writing a sentence properly, he can sense it. He knows right away when the 3-act structure or his sentences or just isn't working right. As a writer, you want to develop this ability as well. To be able to write a sentence and to write a paragraph and just right away, even on your first draft, you know that it needs work. The five senses are not being applied properly. But at the same time, you want to be able to write and to know that your story is on track, that it's not wandering. It's imagine being able to look through a telescope and a microscope at the same time. A microscope can zoom in to something really small and specific, whereas the telescope can see the stars from a vast distance. And you want to develop this ability as a writer. Of course, it's going to take time, but you want to develop this ability within yourself to be able to zoom in on each sentence and to know whether or not you're doing a great job at describing what the character is experiencing so the reader can feel it for themselves. But at the same time, you want to be able to tell whether or not your story is wandering or if it's on track. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds, because there are some writers out there who do a wonderful job at using the 5 senses, but their stories tend to wander all over the place with a very odd ending. Or there are some writers out there who do an amazing job at telling a story, but when it comes to writing that paragraph and using the 5 senses, that's when they're weak. What you want to do is be able to combine the 2 of them even on your first draft. So by the time you write your second draft, it's pretty much already done. One of the things that even Stephen King recommends is the elements of style, the famous book that has helped a tremendous amount of writers being able to write and use grammar properly. The Elements of Style is a book that pretty much ask any successful writer. They will tell you that they read and memorized the elements of style. This allows them to write a sentence properly. They can write a paragraph properly. Because if you have an amazing idea for a story, but you have difficulties writing a sentence, the literary agent is just going to pass on your work. Because when you submit anything to a literary agent, the first thing that they're going to do is ask themselves, can you write a sentence? They're not going to be concerned about the story overall right away. Literary agents want to know whether or not you can just simply write a sentence. And they're going to know. Imagine if someone said that they can play Mozart or Beethoven, and they sat down and they started playing the wrong keys, or the tempo and the pace just wasn't there. It doesn't matter if they know the entire act, the whole thing. If they're hitting the wrong keys right at the very start, no one's going to want to listen to that. Literary agents, when they read your book right away, the first thing that they do is they want to know whether or not you can tell a story, write a paragraph, write a sentence. If you pass that stage, then they're going to want to start reading the novel to see whether or not you can tell a story from start to finish. So in other words, literary agents want to know if you have the telescope and the microscope ability within yourself. Because there's a lot of people out there who will submit work to a literary agent in which, yeah, they can tell a story, but the paragraph just, it's weak. The sentences are weak. So as a writer, you want to be able to focus on these two things while you're writing your first draft, examining that sentence up close and being able to tell the story overall at the same time. But remember, the most important rule is that it takes time and it takes practice. Stephen King says in order to become a great writer, you have to do two things. You have to write and you have to read. No one can become great at something right away. If you look at someone who can juggle knives in a circus, they took a long time to practice. You look at people who can sing opera, they took a long time to practice. We have this silly idea that in order to become a writer, you have to be born an amazing writer right away. And if you're not perfect, you need to quit. The fact is, everybody needs time to practice to become good at something. Even Stephen King needed a lot of time and practice. He too had novels rejected when he submitted them for the first time. And if you want to become good at being able to zoom in and see your novel at a distance, you're going to have to practice at writing, just like learning to play the piano. You ever see those people who can play classical piano? Were they just born with that ability? No, they had to practice, just like everybody else. Don't ever think that you have to be born a great writer. And if you're not a great writer right away, you need to quit? No. You need to believe in yourself and understand and give yourself time and patience to learn how to zoom in and how to write a sentence and how to zoom out and see your story overall. The more you practice doing this, the better you'll become. Your goal is to become your own self-editor. And you can do this, just like Stephen King does. Because look at Stephen King today. He can write a novel very quickly, but it took a lot of time and a lot of practice. Even he will tell you he wasn't perfect right away. Just like how you need to be patient with yourself and practice until you can become the greatest writer you can be. Because it is in you, just like it is in anyone. But it just takes time. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website. I'll leave a link in the description down below where you can click on it and visit my site right away, and you can read all the blogs that I have that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. And be sure to check out my next video where I talk about destroying 30 myths about what it takes to be a great writer. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to that video right here, and you can click on that video and start watching it right now.